Years after the scandal of her shop-bought quiche, Agatha Raisin vowed to redeem her name, but when a judge drops dead mid-bite, her past comes back to haunt her in more ways than one. This is Agatha Raisin and the Ghost of Quiche Past. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. Carsley lay under a wet and blustery sky, the sort that promised rain without the decency to deliver it. Damp leaves clung to the pavements, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and cabbage. Inside her cottage, Agatha Raisin glared at the notice pinned to her kitchen corkboard. Women's Institute Retro Bake Revival. The words were harmless enough, but one line in bold type might as well have been engraved upon her tombstone. Category 3, Quiche Lorraine. She felt the blood rise to her cheeks. It had been years since that humiliating debacle, and still the whisper followed her like an unwanted perfume. The woman who cheated with a shop-bought quiche. She had meant well at the time, well enough anyway, but Carsley never forgot a scandal that could be retold over tea. Hodge, her plump grey cat, lounged on the windowsill, tail flicking as if mocking her. "Don't look at me like that," she muttered. "You've never faced public disgrace." He blinked. Agatha seized her cigarette pack and lit one with defiance. "I'll show them," she said aloud. "I'll bake the wretched thing myself this time, and it'll be marvellous." The smoke curled around her head like a crown of war. She stood, snatched her handbag, and marched out into the drizzle. A woman could only plot redemption over gin, and the Red Lion was serving. The Red Lion smelled of damp wool and gossip. Its brass fixtures glowed faintly under the yellow light, and the locals were clustered around the bar, enjoying the sacred Carsley ritual of saying something kind in a tone that suggested the opposite. Doris Simpson waved from her perch near the hearth. "Evening, Mrs. Raisin. You heard about the bake revival then?" "I've heard," said Agatha grimly, ordering a large gin and tonic. "And before you ask, yes, I'm entering." Bill Wong, sitting at a corner table with a pint, looked up with the resigned expression of a man who'd seen this before. "Agatha, you don't have to prove anything. It's just a competition." "Just a competition," she retorted. "Bill, reputation is everything in this village. If I don't reclaim mine, I'll be known as the quiche fraud until my dying day, and possibly beyond." Charles Fraith, elegant in tweed and insufferably at ease, leaned back in his chair. "Darling, you're already a legend. Why risk sullying the myth with pastry?" "Because," said Agatha, "I intend to bury the past under perfectly baked short crust." Charles smiled lazily. "I'll wager a bottle of Chablis it ends in disaster." "Done," said Agatha, "and when I win, you'll drink to my triumph." Mrs. Bloxby, who had been quietly nursing a half-pint of shandy, gave her the kind of smile that could calm storms. "It's brave of you, Mrs. Raisin. Sometimes facing an old ghost is the only way to lay it to rest." "Ghosts," said Agatha darkly, "I can handle. It's the Women's Institute that terrifies me." Roy Silver's voice suddenly shrieked down the pub telephone. "Aggie, darling, just heard about your big comeback. I smell redemption and column inches." Agatha pinched the bridge of her nose. "Roy, unless you plan to bake, hang up before I have you stuffed into a pie." Think of the publicity, from quiche shame to culinary fame. She slammed the receiver down and took a deep drink. "If I'm ever found murdered, Bill, start by arresting him." By the time she trudged home, night had settled over Carsley like a heavy blanket. The village green gleamed under street lamps, puddles reflecting the honeystone cottages. Inside her own, the kitchen looked accusingly clean, no sign of flour, eggs, or rolling pins. Agatha stared at the countertop, then at her reflection in the dark window. "Right," she said to herself. "Proper ingredients, no shortcuts." She scribbled a list. Butter, cheese, bacon, cream, dignity. Hodge yawned. "You'll see," she told him. "I'll win that blasted thing." A faint scratching sound interrupted her thoughts. It came from the back garden, probably a hedgehog, but in her mood it sounded like fate itself knocking. She flicked off the light, peered out, and saw only mist rising from the lawn. Still, the chill that ran through her wasn't entirely from the draught. When she turned back, the phone was ringing. "Mrs. Raisin?" came a brisk voice. "Marjorie Pottle, WI chairwoman. You're entering, I gather? Splendid. The bake revival will be held at Mircester Hall, recently reopened. You know, the old manor by the river." "Mircester Hall," Agatha repeated. "Isn't that the place rumoured to be haunted by some housekeeper or other?" "Oh, every good venue in the Cotswolds has a ghost," said Marjorie cheerfully. "Adds atmosphere. See you Saturday, dear." The line clicked dead. Agatha stared at the receiver, half amused, half uneasy. Haunted halls, public baking, and the return of her personal shame. It felt absurdly theatrical, which only made it worse. She poured another gin, took a long drag on her cigarette, and muttered, "Let's hope the ghost appreciates good pastry." The next morning brought drizzle and headlines. The Mircester Gazette had splashed a feature across page 3, "Why Bake Revival Promises Spooks and Scones." Agatha scowled over her toast. She could already imagine the glee of her neighbours. Still, she'd faced worse, like being middle-aged and single in a village that considered either condition a moral failure. After breakfast, she drove to Evesham for supplies. The supermarket aisles gleamed with temptation. Frozen quiches mocked her from the chiller section. She gave them a glare that made a passing pensioner recoil. Flour, eggs, cream, butter, all went into her trolley with grim determination. At the checkout, Doris Simpson appeared behind her queue, voice bright as brass polish. "Doing a bit of baking, are we, Mrs. Raisin?" "Yes," said Agatha shortly. "Oh, marvellous. Nothing like a proper homemade quiche. Not like those horrid shop ones." Agatha's smile was tight enough to slice pastry. "Quite." By afternoon, her kitchen resembled a war zone. Flour dusted every surface, eggshells littered the sink, and Hodge sat atop the fridge, observing with the weary disdain of one who had seen human folly before. Agatha's first attempt collapsed like a bad alibi. The second resembled roofing material. The third, mercifully, looked edible. "Victory," she declared, holding it aloft like a trophy. Then, eyeing the clock, she added, "Sort of." When evening fell, she carried the quiche to the table, cut herself a slice, and took a bite. It wasn't bad, perhaps even good. Her spirits lifted. She poured a glass of wine and sat back, imagining the smug faces of Castley's finest as they tasted her masterpiece. For once, they would have to admit that Agatha Raisin could bake, and bake well. Hodge padded to her lap, curling into a warm ball. The wind rattled the window panes. The cottage felt close and content. She stroked his fur absently, mind already drifting to the competition. Still, a thought lingered, sour as overcooked custard. Mircester Hall. Haunted, Marjorie had said. And there had been that noise last night, hadn't there? A small thing, easily explained. If only she believed in easy explanations. She stubbed out her cigarette, rose, and glanced once more at her cooling quiche. The golden surface gleamed in the lamplight, flawless, innocent. "This time," she murmured, "they'll choke on my quiche." Hodge blinked at her, unimpressed. Outside, the wind sighed through the hedgerows as if in answer, a faint, restless sound, almost like laughter. The morning broke with that strained brightness peculiar to the Cotswolds in spring, as if the sun had decided to appear, but didn't really mean it. Mircester Hall, newly reopened and scrubbed within an inch of its life, shimmered in a coat of optimism and bunting. Tables lined the long gallery, their surfaces sagging under pies, trifles, and cakes that dared one another to collapse first. Agatha Raisin stood in the car park staring at her own quiche, covered reverently in cling film. It had survived the drive from Castley without incident, a minor miracle given her nerves. She straightened her leopard print scarf and adjusted her trench coat. "Courage," she told herself aloud. "It's only pastry." Doris Simpson, faithful and practical, hovered beside her holding a handbag large enough to conceal a weapon. "It looks lovely, Mrs. Raisin," she said loyally. Agatha narrowed her eyes. "Lovely isn't enough. It needs to taste divine, and it will, because I—" "Had a little help," Doris interrupted gently. Agatha sniffed. "Supervision, Doris, not help. I merely allowed you to observe the proper technique." "Yes, of course," said Doris without conviction. They entered the hall to a blast of chatter and the sharp scent of polish. The Women's Institute had outdone itself, lace cloths, vases of daffodils, and tea urns steaming like locomotives. The sight filled Agatha with equal parts pride and dread. Her arrival caused an immediate stir. Castley villagers nudged one another, whispering behind programmes. Mrs. Pottle, the WI chairwoman, bustled over in floral polyester. "Mrs. Raisin, how brave of you to enter after, well, you know." Agatha smiled tightly. "The past is another country, Mrs. Pottle, one with bad pastry." "Oh, indeed. Well, pop your entry down over there. Judging begins at 11. By 11 o'clock, the air in the hall had grown heavy with the combined humidity of cake and nerves. 3 judges sat at the long table. Mr. Danforth, retired headmaster and self-appointed moral compass, Felicity Crane, food columnist for the Evesham Echo, and Mrs. Pottle herself, who wielded the score sheets with priestly solemnity. Agatha watched from the sidelines, heart thumping. She'd spent years reclaiming her dignity in Carsley. It would be intolerable to lose it again to a quiche. Charles Fraith appeared at her elbow, effortlessly amused. "Your martyrdom awaits, Aggie. Shall I alert the clergy?" "Go away," she hissed. "You're jinxing me." "I'd never dare. I'm simply here for the spectacle." Mrs. Blocksby drifted over, gentle as ever. "You've done marvellously, Mrs. Raisin. No one could call you cowardly." "Accept everyone," said Agatha. "If this goes wrong, I'll be a village pariah." The judges began their tasting. Applause fluttered here and there, polite and false. Danforth carved a neat wedge of Agatha's quiche, examined it like an examiner marking handwriting, and took a mouthful. Agatha held her breath. He chewed, frowned, and lifted his glass of water. "Perhaps a touch of—" Mrs. Pottle began, then stopped. Danforth's eyes bulged. The glass slipped from his hand and smashed. A gasp swept the room. Danforth made a strangled noise and slumped forward into a custard tart. His chair toppled, his spoon clattered, and silence fell with dreadful precision. For one frozen moment, no one moved. Then voices erupted, shocked, shrill, deliciously alive. "Call an ambulance." Was it the quiche? Didn't she poison someone once? Agatha felt the blood drain from her face. "He's choking!" she shouted, but no one listened. In Carsley, reputation always came first, first aid second. Within minutes the hall buzzed with chaos. Someone fainted into the scones. Someone else demanded refunds for raffle tickets. Agatha stood stiff with disbelief while paramedics and police arrived in grim procession. The body was swiftly covered, the cakes less so. Bill Wong entered looking resigned, tie askew, expression somewhere between weary affection and dread. "Agatha," he said quietly, "please tell me you didn't bake another murder weapon." "I did not," she snapped. "I'm innocent. Again." "I'll need the quiche." "You'll have to prise it from my cold, flour-dusted hands." "Exhibit A," said Bill firmly, lifting it away, "and standard procedure." Agatha glared at him. "You just like humiliating me in public." "Only when you make it this easy." Outside, the drizzle had returned. The bunting sagged and the villagers loitered in scandalous delight. Roy Silver arrived in a rush of perfume and panic, waving a camera. "Aggie, darling, I just heard. You can't keep doing this. People will start associating your name with homicide." "They already have," she growled. "Now stop shrieking." Roy peered at the police cars. "Is it true he died mid-bite? That's ghastly, and yet so narratively satisfying." She turned on him. "If you don't shut up, I'll test my next quiche on you." Charles emerged from the hall, hands in pockets, expression mild. Well, that was dramatic. Poor old Danforth. Though he always did talk as if he were dying of superiority. Agatha stared at him. "You could show a bit more respect." "I am. I didn't say he deserved it." He patted her shoulder. "Cheer up, Aggie. At least your cooking finally made an impression." She nearly threw her umbrella at him. Mrs. Blocksby appeared, holding her handbag like a moral shield. "The vicar's wife from Evesham said she saw Mr. Danforth quarrelling with that caterer woman earlier. Something about unpaid bills." Agatha perked up. "Now that's more like it. A motive." "Do let the police handle it," Mrs. Blocksby said gently. "I will, once they stop suspecting me. Honestly, it's a conspiracy of fools." Bill approached again, notebook in hand. "Agatha, did you notice anything odd before he collapsed?" "Only that my quiche was perfect." "That's certainly odd," murmured Charles. Agatha ignored him. "Someone must have tampered with it. I left it on the table for barely 2 minutes." Bill sighed. "We'll see what the lab says. For now, stay available." "Available?" she repeated. "I'm not a suspect. I'm a victim of slander." He gave her a look. "Just don't leave the village." "I've nowhere else to go," she muttered. By late afternoon, the hall had emptied, leaving behind the sad remains of celebration, flattened scones, spilled tea, and a lingering tang of tragedy. Agatha stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and drew in the smoke like armour. Her mind raced. The quiche had been fine at home, untouched during transport. The poison must have been added later. But who would dare? Half the village, probably. A faint noise drifted from the hall, a creak, then something softer. She turned. The door stood ajar, though she'd seen the last constable lock it. She peered into the gloom. "Bill?" she called. No answer, only the whisper of wind across stone floors. Then, distinct as a breath beside her ear, came a voice. "Agatha." The cigarette dropped from her fingers. "Who's there?" she snapped, heart thudding. Silence. The door eased shut with a sigh. For a long moment she stood frozen. Then, scoffing aloud, she retrieved her cigarette. "Ghosts," she muttered, lighting a fresh one. "If I start believing in those, I really will need therapy." Still, as she walked to her car, the fine hairs on her neck refused to lie flat. Somewhere behind her, Mircester Hall loomed grey against the drizzle, windows dark as eyes. Agatha exhaled smoke, straightened her scarf and muttered, "Next time, I'm entering the Victoria Sponge." By the following morning, Carsley had done what Carsley did best, transformed tragedy into entertainment. The Mircester Gazette's headline, "Poison at the Bake Revival, Quiche Strikes Again," was already pinned to the notice board at the post office and read aloud in the Red Lion before opening time. Agatha Raisin, still in her dressing gown, sat at her kitchen table surrounded by cigarette smoke and outrage. The telephone rang for the 5th time in an hour. She snatched it up. "If this is another vulture from the Gazette, I'll sue." "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," came Doris Simpson's too bright voice. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am about all that awful talk." "Then don't repeat it," snapped Agatha. "Goodbye." She slammed the receiver down. Hodge, curled on the windowsill, opened one golden eye in mild disapproval. "Oh, don't you start," Agatha muttered. "Half the village thinks I'm a murderess. The other half's disappointed I'm not." Her answering machine blinked red. 3 messages. She pressed play. "Mrs. Raisin, it's Mrs. Mason from the WI. Do ring me back if you're not under police supervision." Beep. "Agatha, darling, it's Roy. The press adore you. They're calling it the curse of the quiche. I'm booking morning TV." Beep. Then Bill Wong's steady voice. "Call me when you can. There's been a development." Agatha reached for her coat. "If I don't face this head-on, they'll have me in prison by tea time." Hodge meowed once, unimpressed by heroics. Mircester Hall looked different in daylight, less grand, more exhausted. The bunting hung limp in the drizzle, and the car park was cordoned off with police tape. Charles Fraith leaned against his vintage convertible, radiating indolent amusement. "I thought you'd sworn off scandal, Aggie." "I didn't swear off it," she said, marching past. "I just prefer it on my own terms." They ducked under the tape. Inside, the hall smelled of cold stone and disinfectant. Echoes followed every step. The long gallery, once festive, now resembled a battlefield of abandoned crockery. "Haunted enough for you," murmured Charles. Agatha ignored him. "It's drafty, not haunted, though I wouldn't rule out malevolent forces from the WI." As they explored, she noticed the air growing cooler. In the old servants' passage, a faint movement caught her eye, something white vanishing round a corner. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "Only your imagination. It's unusually vocal today." "Imagination doesn't wear an apron," said Agatha. Charles gave a long-suffering sigh. "You've been reading too many detective novels." "Rubbish. I write them by living." They reached the old kitchen. Pots hung crookedly. The range glistened with age. A single door stood ajar leading to the garden. Agatha peered out. The herb beds were overgrown but still recognizable. She plucked a leaf and sniffed. "Aconite," she murmured. "The police said Danforth was poisoned with it." "Lovely. So we're standing in a murder garden." Agatha pocketed the leaf. "Evidence." Charles's eyebrows rose. "Or theft." She turned sharply. "You'd be no help at all in a crisis, Charles." "I am the help in a crisis. I bring the car." By the time they returned to Carsley, gossip had ripened like fruit left too long in the sun. Doris Simpson intercepted Agatha on the green, cheeks pink from excitement. "Mrs. Raisin, you'll never believe it. Mrs. Lacey swears she saw something at the hall last night, a figure in an apron floating by the window." Agatha snorted. "Floating? More likely staggering. Probably a cleaner who overdid the sherry." "Well, Mrs. Bloxby says it's the ghost of that poor caretaker's wife. the one who drowned herself after her husband died. Mrs. Blocksby said that. Doris blushed. Well, not exactly. She said some souls linger near unfinished business. Then I'd better find the business and finish it before someone starts charging admission. As she strode off, Doris called after her. They say ghosts don't appear to everyone, only to those who need a warning. Agatha muttered, if the spirit world's offering warnings, they can start with the parish council's caterer. That afternoon, she visited Bill Wong at the Mircester station. The office smelled faintly of old paper and bad coffee. Bill looked up from his notes. I was just about to ring you again. You were right. Poison. Aconite, taken from the gardens at the Hall. Danforth didn't die instantly. It was ingested shortly before judging. Meaning someone tampered with the food on the table, said Agatha. Maybe even mine. He nodded. Possibly. But we found something else. Danforth had been getting anonymous letters, accusing him of cheating at competitions, taking credit for other people's baking. Petty stuff, but threatening in tone. Any suspects? A few. That local caterer he argued with, and the late caretaker's widow, Nora Phelps. She still tends those gardens, apparently unpaid. Claims she does it to keep her husband's spirit at peace, which conveniently keeps her near the aconite, said Agatha. Bill gave her a warning look. Leave this to us, Agatha. She smiled sweetly. Of course, he sighed, which means you won't. Quite right. By evening, Carsley was vibrating with paranormal enthusiasm. The Red Lion hosted a special ghost ale night. Over pints, villagers debated whether Danforth's death was divine punishment or merely bad luck. Agatha, hunched at the bar, smoked furiously while Charles nursed his whiskey. Honestly, she said, one corpse and everyone loses their wits. Ghosts don't poison people. Charles sipped. No, but they make convenient scapegoats, especially for the living. Meaning me, I suppose. Perish the thought, he smirked. But if the haunting brings tourists, you might finally sell that PR package Roy's always dreaming up. I'd rather haunt him. Mrs. Blocksby entered quietly, her presence softening the room's rough laughter. She joined them at the corner table. Mrs. Raisin, she said kindly, perhaps you should take a little rest. These things weigh on one's mind. Rest? While the village paints me as a culinary murderer? I think not. Then at least come to tea tomorrow. I found something curious. Agatha eyed her suspiciously. Not another sermon? Mrs. Blocksby smiled. Not quite. It's in an old recipe book. I think you'll want to see it. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette. If it's a recipe for peace of mind, I'll take 2 copies. Mrs. Blocksby stood. 3 o'clock then, and do try not to investigate any ghosts before that. As the vicar's wife left, Charles leaned close. Tea with Blocksby. That's either salvation or punishment. Agatha drained her glass. At this point, I'll take either. Outside, the drizzle thickened into proper rain. Carsley's lamps glowed like watchful eyes. Somewhere beyond the green, the church bell chimed 9, solemn and knowing. Agatha drew her coat tighter, feeling that odd chill again, the same one she'd felt in the hall. Perhaps imagination, perhaps something colder. She turned for home, muttering, if ghosts are real, they'd better have the decency to be polite. Hodge was waiting on the windowsill when she arrived, tail twitching. Agatha fed him absently, poured herself a small gin, and stared into the dark garden beyond the glass. The rain tapped softly, like fingers at a door. Warning or not, she said aloud, I'm not the one who needs haunting. Hodge yawned and turned away, unimpressed by supernatural ambition. Agatha smiled faintly and lit another cigarette. The smoke curled upward, defiant and domestic, against the restless night beyond. The Cotswold morning began with deceptive peace, blue sky, mild breeze, and the faint clang of church bells drifting over Carsley's honeystone roofs. Agatha Raisin, however, was not fooled. Weather like that usually meant gossip was brewing. At the vicarage, Mrs. Blocksby ushered her into the sitting room with gentle efficiency. The place smelled faintly of furniture polish and scones. On the tea table lay an ancient WI recipe book, its pages yellowed and edges frayed like old secrets. I found this in the church jumble, said Mrs. Blocksby. Look here, Mrs. Raisin, a note tucked between the pages. Agatha leaned forward. The handwriting was firm, masculine, and unmistakably self-important. Never again. She knows. Danforth's scrawl, said Agatha, lighting a cigarette despite Mrs. Bloxby's resigned sigh. What did he mean? She knows what. Perhaps something to do with the bake revival. Or something else entirely. Agatha tapped ash into her saucer. That pompous old fraud didn't die for under-seasoning. Someone had a reason. Mrs. Bloxby smiled mildly. The difficulty will be finding which she he meant. Agatha's mind ticked. Doris Simpson had once worked for Danforth. Gladys Trent had loathed him since he'd won Best Trifle 3 years running, and Nora Phelps, the caretaker's widow, hovered like a ghost over everything lately. 3 suspects, said Agatha briskly. I'll start today. Do take care, Mrs. Raisin, murmured Mrs. Bloxby. Curiosity may bake the quiche, but it seldom washes the dish. Agatha snorted. I'll risk it. Doris Simpson's cottage smelled of lavender polish and resignation. She greeted Agatha in a flour-dusted apron, cheeks pink, eyes wary. Come for a cuppa, Mrs. Raisin. I've just put the kettle on. I'm more interested in your mince pies, said Agatha. Doris's hands stilled. Oh? I was thinking about Danforth. You worked for him, didn't you? Years ago. Why? He always boasted of those famous Christmas pies of his. Agatha paused just long enough to let it sting. Funny, though, his handwriting's all over this recipe book. Makes one wonder whose hands were really in the dough. Doris flushed crimson. Now, Mrs. Raisin, that's not fair. Come off it, Doris. I won't tell a soul if you admit it. He paid you, didn't he? Silence stretched. At last Doris sighed. He slipped me a few quid to bake them for him. Said no one would believe a man could do proper pastry. I told him it was dishonest, but he laughed. And you took the money. Times were hard then, but I never wanted it known. So you had reason to keep him quiet, or stop him bragging. Doris glared. You think I'd poison a man over pastry? Agatha smiled thinly. I think people kill for less. But don't worry, your secret's safe with me, for now. She left before Doris could fetch the rolling pin. Gladys Trent's tea room in Mircester offered the most unconvincing cheer in Gloucestershire. Lace curtains, fake roses, and scones dense enough to be registered as weapons. Agatha sat opposite the proprietor, eyeing her teacup suspiciously. You knew Danforth well? She asked. Gladys sniffed. Too well. That man had the morals of a sponge cake left out overnight. Always borrowing money. Always flirting. Flirting? Agatha's ears pricked. Oh, he loved attention. Claimed he was writing a cookbook once, asked me for inspiration. I told him to find it elsewhere. Did he owe you money? Gladys hesitated. A bit. He promised to repay after the bake revival. Said he had a sure thing. Then the fool went and died instead. Agatha leaned in. Did he ever mention being blackmailed? If he had, he'd have bragged about it. Everything was drama with him. He enjoyed being important. Agatha took a bite of scone, regretted it instantly, and murmured through crumbs. Perhaps someone decided he wasn't important enough to live. Gladys looked alarmed. You don't think? I don't think, said Agatha, rising. I know something stinks, and it's not just your baking. Outside, she brushed crumbs from her coat, feeling a flicker of grim satisfaction. Doris had guilt, Gladys had motive, and both were easier to interrogate than the dead caretaker's widow, who seemed to appear and vanish like mist. By the time Agatha reached home, the drizzle had turned to fine rain. She found Hodge stretched across her chair, tail flicking with indifference. Yes, she told him. You'd have solved it already, I'm sure. The doorbell rang. She opened it to find Roy Silver in full London splendour, trench coat, too much cologne, and a grin that could be seen from Evesham. Aggie, darling, I came as soon as I heard. We must manage the optics. Roy, I'm not a publicity stunt. Nonsense. You're a survivor, the wronged woman of Castley. We'll spin it into a feature, bake and break a murder. Picture it. Redemption, resilience, recipes. Agatha stared at him. If you don't leave in 30 seconds, I'll test my next quiche on you. Fine, but at least let me film B-roll of you looking tragic over pastry. The door slammed in his face. Through the woods she heard, That's the spirit, darling. Rage is relatable. Evening drew down, soft and grey. Agatha poured herself a large gin and studied the recipe book Mrs. Bloxby had given her. She flipped through the pages, frowning at smudged notes and half-erased comments. Never again, she knows. She murmured the words aloud. Who's she, indeed? Doris, Gladys, or Nora? The clock ticked in answer. She took another sip. The fire crackled. Outside, the rain strengthened, drumming on the panes like impatient fingers. Hodge jumped onto the table, tail sweeping dangerously near the gin glass. "Mind yourself," she warned. He ignored her, as cats do, and began pouring the edge of the recipe book. With a sudden flick, it tumbled to the floor, pages fanning open. A loose scrap fluttered out, a slip of paper yellowed and brittle. Agatha bent to retrieve it. Faded ink spelled out 5 words. "The ghost walks at dawn." She froze. The handwriting was identical to Danforth's. "Oh, splendid," she muttered. "Now we've got poetry." Hodge meowed, unimpressed. Agatha turned the paper over. The reverse was blank, but for a faint oily stain. Perhaps butter, perhaps something else. "A clue," she murmured, "or a red herring in greaseproof paper." She looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, ghastly streetlights glowed through mist. Somewhere in that darkness lay Mircester Hall, and perhaps, if gossip were right, a ghost who walked before dawn. She felt the familiar thrill, that mix of fear and vanity that came whenever a mystery beckoned. People might mock her meddling, but they always came running when she was right. Agatha poured another measure of gin and straightened her shoulders. "Fine," she said aloud. "If the ghost walks at dawn, so shall I, though preferably in Wellingtons." Hodge stretched and yawned. "Don't look at me like that," she added. "Even Sherlock had his Watson. You can be mine, quietly." The cat closed his eyes, signalling professional detachment. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, gathered the recipe book and the note, and marched upstairs to find her torch. There was no point in waiting for Ghost to arrive uninvited. She paused halfway up, glancing back at the darkened kitchen. The fire hissed softly. The room smelled of smoke and pastry crumbs. "Never again. She knows," she whispered. The phrase hung in the air like breath in winter. For the first time that day, Agatha felt a flicker of unease unsoftened by sarcasm. Still, unease or not, curiosity always won. She smiled tightly. "Let's see who's walking in that hall before the cock crows." Hodge flicked an ear but offered no blessing. Agatha fetched her coat and torch, muttering, "This village will be the death of me, or worse, my reputation." The rain eased to a patter. Somewhere in the distance the church clock chimed 11. Agatha looked out across the dark fields and said, "Midnight stakeout it is. Heaven help the ghost if he's got dirty boots on my floor." She lit a final cigarette, the ember glowing like defiance, and took a slow drag. The smoke curled upward, thin and wry, rather like Agatha's faith in common sense. The Cotswold moon hung sulking over the fields, half hidden by cloud, as if unwilling to watch what came next. Agatha Raisin's little hatchback lurched along the rutted lane to Mircester Hall, its headlights cutting brief swathes through mist. "This is idiotic," she muttered, gripping the steering wheel. "Breaking into haunted houses at midnight. What am I, Scooby-Doo?" Charles Frayth reclined beside her, irritatingly serene. "You wanted excitement, my dear. Consider me your reluctant accomplice." "You could at least look reluctant," she snapped. "I am, inwardly." The car crunched to a stop before the tall iron gates. Agatha stepped out, trenchcoat belted tight, torch in hand, and squelched across the drive. The great house loomed above them, its windows like half-shut eyes, its ivy whispering in the wind. "Creepy," said Charles cheerfully. "Rather suits you." Agatha ignored him and pushed open the side gate, which groaned theatrically. "Right, we're in. Try not to faint from bravery." "You do realize," said Charles following, "that if we're caught, you'll be in the Gazette again." "I'm already in the Gazette again," she hissed. "Castley sleuth seen snooping in spectral grounds. May as well earn it." Inside, Mircester Hall was colder than outdoors, its long corridors smelling of dust and polish. Agatha's torch beam skimmed over portraits of grim ancestors who might easily have been alive last week. "You're sure this isn't breaking and entering?" whispered Charles. "It's investigating," said Agatha. "There's a difference. A legal one, a moral one. Now shush." Their footsteps echoed on flagstones. Somewhere above, a door creaked open. Agatha stopped, every hair alert. "Wind," Charles murmured. "That's what they always say before the ghost strangles them." So reassuring. They reached the main hall where moonlight seeped through tall windows like diluted milk. A clock somewhere ticked faintly, keeping time with their nerves. "Remind me," said Charles, "why we're risking pneumonia. Because the police will take weeks to find what we can in an hour. She brandished her torch. That note. The ghost walks at dawn. If Danforth wrote it, someone's staging ghostly nonsense to cover their tracks. Or it really is a ghost. You're worse than Mrs. Blocksby, said Agatha. I take that as a compliment. They reached the service wing, long disused. Agatha's torch revealed cobwebs thick enough to knit with. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something else. Mud, perhaps. She crouched and frowned. Footprints, she whispered. Charles bent beside her. Fresh ones. So much for haunted. Ghosts don't wear boots. Unless they're very sensible ghosts. The prints led toward the old kitchen. Pots dangled from hooks, their copper bellies dull with dust. Somewhere in the corner, a tap dripped with irritating persistence. Then came the sound. Soft, rhythmic, almost human. Footsteps. Agatha froze. The torch trembled in her hand. Charles's face turned serious for once. Stay here, he whispered. Not on your life, she hissed back. The footsteps drew nearer, then stopped. Agatha swung the torch beam, just in time to catch a glimpse of white fabric sliding past the doorway. She gasped. Did you see that? Yes, a bit of curtain, probably. That was no curtain. It had form. So does hysteria, he murmured. Agatha stalked forward, chin high, torch ready. The corridor beyond was empty, except for the faint flutter of something caught on a nail, a scrap of lace. She pocketed it triumphantly. Physical evidence, she said. Ghosts don't shed lace. Charles sighed. Women do, when meddling. They pressed on toward the pantry. The door resisted, then yielded with a groan. Inside, the smell of earth was stronger, mixed with damp paper. Shelves were stacked with old boxes and a toppled filing cabinet. Good grief, said Charles, sweeping his light over a heap of folders. What's this? Agatha knelt, riffling through the papers. WI records. Decades of them. He must have been keeping dirt on everyone. She held up one page. Disqualification overturned by committee vote. Confidential. Danforth again, she murmured. He was disqualified once, cheating with shop-bought pastry just like me, but they reinstated him. A kindred spirit, then. Don't you dare, she snapped. The chairwoman signed this. Mrs. Pottle herself. She covered it up. Charles straightened, brushing dust from his jacket. So, Danforth's glorious reputation was built on deceit, and Pottle helped him hide it. A tidy motive for murder, if someone knew. And maybe a reason she's been jumpy lately, said Agatha. When people bury secrets, they usually dig their own graves too. A faint metallic clink interrupted her triumph. Charles bent down. What's this? He picked up a small key, tarnished and ornate. The initials CS were engraved on its bow. Agatha squinted. CS? Could that be Charles? Stokes, he cut in swiftly. Cynthia Stokes, the former housekeeper. My father sacked her years ago for stealing linen. She narrowed her eyes. You seem remarkably quick with that explanation. He gave her his laziest smile. I read plaques. It's an idle man's hobby. Agatha pocketed the key. You're hiding something. I'm hiding from boredom. It's not the same. The wind rose outside, moaning through cracks in the windows. Agatha's nerves tingled like an overtuned radio. Let's check the cellar, she said briskly. Where else would anyone hide something rotten? They found the door half open, stairs descending into darkness. A smell of dust and cork greeted them. Wine cellar, said Charles, visibly cheered. Finally, something worth finding. Not a chance, I need a clear head. Tragic waste of opportunity, he muttered. Shelves lined the walls, some still holding bottles, others stacks of wooden crates. Agatha ran her fingers over a label. W.I. Archives, 1979. He kept everything, she said. Letters, minutes, even recipes. Look here, Danforth's signature again. Charles crouched beside a crate. If Danforth's reputation was fraudulent, and Pottle knew, perhaps she feared exposure after his death. Maybe she feared someone else more, said Agatha. Those threatening letters Bill mentioned weren't just about cheating. They were about blackmail. So our phantom isn't a ghost, Charles mused, just an opportunist in white linen. Agatha shot him a look. You sound disappointed. A little. I was rather hoping for ectoplasm. She found herself laughing, nerves easing. You're impossible. But charming, he said lightly. Like a rash. A sudden bang cut the air. Agatha nearly dropped her torch. Somewhere above them, a door had slammed. "Probably the wind," said Charles, though his voice wasn't quite steady. "If that's the wind," said Agatha, "I'm the Queen Mother." They crept up the stairs. The hall lay silent again, though the portraits seemed to watch with faint disdain. Agatha exhaled, trying to steady her pulse. "We've enough for tonight," said Charles, "before your imagination requires police backup." "You may retreat," said Agatha. "I'm checking one last thing. Aggie," but she was already moving toward the side entrance where she'd glimpsed the figure earlier. The door there hung open a fraction. She pushed it wider and shone her torch out onto the gravel. 2 sets of footprints, one small, one larger, both fresh. She knelt, tracing the smaller set. "Women's shoes," she said softly. Charles looked uneasy. "Perhaps Mrs. Pottle's. She's the only one with access now. Or someone impersonating her." "Aggie, I think we've tempted fate enough for one night." Agatha hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but I'm coming back with Bill tomorrow. This place is riddled with lies." "And bats," said Charles. "You included." They left the hall near 1 o'clock, the mist thick as cream. Agatha drove in silence, mind whirring. The note, the footprints, the records, the key. Too many threads and none yet tied. "You'll catch pneumonia at this rate," Charles remarked lazily. "I'll catch a killer first." "And people say you don't have hobbies." When she dropped him at Castley Manor, he leaned in the window. "You do realize, Aggie, that if ghosts exist, you're their natural predator." She gave him a wry smile. "They'll learn to haunt someone easier to frighten." Morning came grey and sour. Agatha woke to the telephone shrilling. She stumbled from bed, Hodge glaring at the intrusion. "What?" she barked into the receiver. Bill Wong's voice was grave. "Agatha, you'd better sit down." "I'm already horizontal." "Mrs. Pottle's dead. Found in her car outside Mircester Hall. Engine running, exhaust blocked." Agatha froze. "Suicide?" "Looks like it, but knowing you, you'll say murder." "Because it is," she said slowly. "She was covering up Danforth's cheating, and someone wanted her silence permanent." Bill sighed. "Don't start meddling again." "I've already started," she said, and hung up. Hodge leapt onto the bed, purring for breakfast. Agatha scratched his head absently, staring out at the drizzle crawling down her window. "Well, Hodge," she murmured, "so much for ghosts. The living are doing fine without them." She reached for her cigarettes, lit one, and exhaled toward the ceiling. The smoke curled upward, pale as the morning mist, as if carrying her resolve with it. "Midnight visits, dead chairwomen, and dishonest quiches," she said. "At least life's not dull." Hodge blinked, unimpressed, and padded away. Agatha smiled faintly. "You're right, of course. I do bring it on myself." The phone began ringing again. She ignored it, drew another drag, and muttered, "And I wouldn't have it any other way." Castley woke to rain and rumours, both steady and unrelenting. By breakfast time, half the village believed the Women's Institute chairwoman had gassed herself in remorse. The other half were convinced Agatha Raisin had frightened her to death. Agatha, glaring into her coffee, muttered, "If one more person uses the word jinx, I'll oblige them." Hodge twitched an ear from his windowsill perch. He'd heard this tone before, the prelude to trouble. The telephone rang. Agatha snatched it up. "Mrs. Raisin? Sergeant Wilkes here, just to inform you." "Oh, splendid. I do so love police notifications at breakfast." "The pathologist's report suggests suicide. Car running, exhaust blocked, clear-cut." "Nothing's clear-cut except your department's eyesight." She knew something. Someone silenced her. Now, Mrs. Raisin." But Agatha had already slammed the receiver down. By 11, she was at the Red Lion, nursing a gin and tonic and what remained of her temper. The locals, gathered for elevenses and speculation, glanced up as she entered. The chatter hushed, then resumed in hissing undertones. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," called Doris Simpson. "Terrible business, that poor woman. Still, nice to see you up and about." "Yes, I've managed to avoid spontaneous combustion," said Agatha tartly. She caught sight of Mrs. Bloxby by the window, serene as ever over a pot of tea. Agatha joined her with a sigh. "They've written her off as suicide," she said. "Case closed." "Perhaps the police are right," said Mrs. Bloxby gently. "They never are," said Agatha, "except when arresting me." Mrs. Bloxby hesitated. "I heard something, awkward, about Mrs. Pottle and Charles's cousin, one of the Fraith family." Agatha froze. An affair? It seems so, quietly scandalous. If true, it gives her death another shade entirely. Agatha downed the rest of her gin. And Charles didn't say a word. Of course he didn't. Time to correct that omission. Carsley Manor, even on a grey day, looked infuriatingly elegant. Charles Frayth, in a cream jumper and indolent humour, opened the door himself. "Aggie, what a pleasant— well, what a surprise." She swept in without invitation. "Did you know your cousin was sleeping with Mrs. Pottle?" He blinked, then smiled faintly. Straight to the point, as ever. "Don't charm me, Charles, I'm furious." I gathered. He reached for a bottle of Chablis. "Drink?" "No. Yes. Oh, damn it, pour one." As he obliged, she prowled the room. "You knew, didn't you?" "I suspected," he said mildly, "but one can hardly interrogate one's relatives about their romantic missteps. It's vulgar." "Vulgar? The woman's dead in her car." "Which makes it even less polite to pry," he said, handing her the glass. She took a long swallow. "You're impossible." "Undeniably." Agatha glared at him. "Your family seems distressingly entangled in murder." "You're the one who brings it to my doorstep, Aggie. I merely provide the alcohol." Their eyes met briefly, the quarrel softened by something unspoken. Then she set the glass down with a thud. "Enough flannel. That key we found at the hall, engraved C.S. It's not you, is it?" "You flatter me," he said. "But alas, no." "Then who?" He frowned. "Cynthia Stokes, the old housekeeper. My father sacked her years ago for stealing linen. She lived in one of the tied cottages near Evesham." "And she's still alive?" "As far as I know. Though if she's mixed up in this nonsense, I'd rather she weren't." Agatha grabbed her coat. "Then I'll pay Mrs. Stokes a call." "Aggie," he said, catching her arm, "don't go charging about in the rain. Let Bill handle it." She shook him off. "I trust my instincts, not the police. They'd misplace a clue if it shouted its own address." Charles watched her march out into the drizzle, half amused, half concerned. "You'll be the death of yourself," he murmured, "and probably several others en route." Evesham's outer lanes were slick with rain. Agatha's wipers groaned across the windscreen, struggling to keep up. The Stokes cottage lay beyond the main road, crouched behind a wall of ivy and neglect. She pulled up by the gate and stepped out, umbrella snapping in the wind. The house stood silent, its windows black. Something about the stillness prickled her nerves. "Cynthia Stokes," she called. "Mrs. Stokes, are you home?" No answer. She circled to the back, boots squelching in mud. The garden was overgrown, brambles clawing at her coat. A faint, acrid smell caught her nose. Smoke, but not fresh. "Oh, Lord," she murmured. The cottage door hung half off its hinges. Inside, the air was cold and sour. Agatha covered her mouth. The place was gutted, walls blackened, beams scorched. Charred furniture lay scattered like bones. She stepped cautiously across the threshold, torch beams slicing the gloom. The fire had burned hot but contained, likely days old. Near the hearth she spotted a patch the flames had missed, a pile of papers, singed but legible. She crouched, heart thudding. One was a typed note. Half-melted ribbon attached, letters smudged but clear enough. "You'll keep silent, or join him." She drew in a sharp breath. The same tone, same phrasing as the threatening letters Bill had mentioned. "So much for suicide," she whispered. From outside came the crunch of tires on gravel. Agatha froze, torch off, pulse racing. Through the cracked window she glimpsed headlights, someone pulling up. The beam swung across the garden, then stilled. A door slammed. "Mrs. Stokes?" called a man's voice. Calm, unhurried, too smooth. Agatha ducked behind the ruined armchair. She couldn't see the speaker, only the shadow moving at the window. A torch flickered, sweeping the room. She held her breath. The beam paused inches from her hiding place, then turned away. Footsteps retreated, fading into the rain. After a long moment, she exhaled shakily. Whoever that was hadn't come to reminisce. She darted to the door, peered out. The car was already reversing, taillights vanishing down the lane. She noted the number plate, half obscured by mud, P97 LXM. "Got you," she muttered. By the time she reached home, it was near midnight. Carsley was asleep, save for the faint glow of the vicarage lamp and the pub's last stragglers. Agatha slammed her front door and leaned against it, trembling slightly. Hodge appeared, tail high, demanding supper. "You're late," she told him, "and so am I. I've nearly been roasted alive for a clue." She fed him absent-mindedly, then sank onto the sofa with a sigh. The house smelled comfortingly of wood polish and faint smoke, her own kind from the ashtray. The telephone rang again. She jumped. "Agatha Raisin," she said sharply. "Aggie, it's Roy. I've been dying to reach you. Darling, the press are circling like vultures. They're calling it Quichegate. We could own this story." "Roy," she cut in, "a woman's dead and another's house just burned down. All the more reason to take control of the narrative. If you say narrative again, I'll throttle you with my phone cord." "Fine, fine, but just imagine, Agatha Raisin, from suspect to sleuth. It's inspirational." She hung up. For a moment she sat in silence, then gave a short, tired laugh. The absurdity of it all, the deaths, the ghosts, Roy's PR schemes rolled over her like a wave. She fetched a gin, her hands steadying with each sip. The day's discoveries tumbled through her mind. The typewriter ribbon, the threat, the burnt house, the mystery visitor. And the car, P97 LXM. Someone local, she was sure of it. She rose, fetched her notebook, and jotted down the number before fatigue could blur it. Hodge leapt onto her lap, warm and insistent. "You're the only male in this village who doesn't lie," she told him. He purred. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night lay still and heavy as if listening. Agatha drew the curtains, lit a cigarette, and stared at the smoke curling into the lamplight. "Two dead," she murmured, "and someone tidy enough to burn the evidence. Murderers always underestimate women with torches." She smiled faintly, the edge of weariness softening. "Especially ones in heels." Hodge yawned, unimpressed by courage. Agatha reached down, scratched his head, and said, "All right, clever boy. Bedtime. We've ghosts and killers waiting for us tomorrow." As she turned out the lamp, the phone gave one last ring before the line went silent. Agatha ignored it. If someone wanted to frighten her, they'd chosen the wrong woman. The morning after the fire dawned weak and watery, as if the sun itself felt apologetic. Mist clung to the hedgerows, the air heavy with the smell of damp ash. Agatha Raisin stood by her car in the Mircester Hospital car park, staring at her reflection in the windscreen. The face that looked back was pale, cross, and she decided, altogether too middle-aged for comfort. "Pull yourself together, woman," she muttered, snapping her coat collar up against the wind. "You're here to interrogate, not introspect." Inside, the hospital smelt of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. A nurse with the stern efficiency of a prison matron led her down a corridor towards the burns ward. "She's sedated," the nurse said, "but if you must talk, keep it brief. Doctor said she was lucky, 3rd degree in places, smoke inhalation. Most don't make it." Agatha nodded grimly. "I'm simply checking on a friend." "Of course you are," said the nurse, in a tone suggesting she'd heard that before. Cynthia Stokes lay swaddled in bandages, her face pale beneath layers of gauze. Tubes hissed softly at her bedside. Agatha drew a chair closer. "Mrs. Stokes, it's Agatha Raisin," she whispered. "From Carsley. I know you can hear me, so listen. You didn't set that fire, did you? Someone wanted you quiet." A faint sound escaped the woman's lips, almost a sigh. Then, barely audible, came the words, "It wasn't the ghost. It was the garden." Her eyelids fluttered shut. The monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to revelation. Agatha sat back, heart thumping. "The garden? What in heaven's name does that mean?" The nurse appeared. "That's enough, Mrs. Raisin." Agatha left reluctantly, the words repeating in her head all the way down the corridor. It wasn't the ghost. It was the garden. By the time she reached Carsley, rain had resumed its familiar drizzle. The village green was deserted, save for Doris Simpson trudging by with her shopping trolley. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. Heard poor Mrs. Stokes survived, barely. They say her cottage looked like a bonfire night gone wrong." "Really, Doris," said Agatha, lighting a cigarette, "you could give the Grim Reaper a run for social engagements." Doris sniffed. "Just saying. And between us, the postman told me the police think it was arson." Agatha stopped. "Arson? Someone poured petrol through the letterbox, apparently. Beastly." Agatha exhaled smoke thoughtfully. "Indeed." "Oh, and Mrs. Bloxby's looking for you. Something about flowers, I think." "Flowers," Agatha repeated. "How terribly appropriate." At the vicarage, Mrs. Bloxby was arranging daffodils in a jug when Agatha stormed in, dripping rainwater onto the mat. "You wanted me?" "Ah, Mrs. Raisin, do come in. You look like an avenging angel, if angels smoked and swore." Agatha threw herself into an armchair. Cynthia Stokes mumbled something about the garden before lapsing into her coma. "Does that mean anything to you?" Mrs. Blocksby considered. "Perhaps. I've heard gossip over the years. Her husband used to be caretaker at Mircester Hall before he died. An accident with the mower, poor man. The garden was their pride. After his death, the hall management let her keep tending it, but there was an argument when they sold part of the grounds to developers. Danforth chaired that committee." Agatha sat forward. "So she had a grudge." "Perhaps, or grief twisted into bitterness. The aconite beds there were her husband's speciality. Deadly beautiful, I suppose." "Aconite again," said Agatha. "It's popping up like Japanese knotweed." Mrs. Blocksby gave a small smile. "Just remember, Mrs. Raisin, sometimes vengeance hides behind good gardening." Agatha ignored the sermon tone. If Danforth crossed her and Pottle covered for him, that gives motive for both murders. But then why the fire? To silence her before she talked? "Or to frighten her," said Mrs. Blocksby softly. "Some people prefer intimidation to confession." Agatha rose. "Either way, I'm not waiting for the police to connect the dots. Bill Wong's idea of progress is moving his paper clips." "Do be careful," the vicar's wife called after her. "I'm always careful," said Agatha, tripping over the doorstep on her way out. Back home, Agatha shed her coat and poured herself a gin. The cottage was quiet except for the patter of rain against the windows. Hodge leapt onto the table, tail flicking, and gave her a look of feline judgment. "Don't start," she told him. "I'm thinking." He sat down, as if prepared to supervise. Agatha lit a cigarette and paced. The garden, aconite. Stokes tended it. Danforth was poisoned with it. Pottle's death covers up the connection. But who's left to profit from silence? Hodge yawned. "Exactly," said Agatha. "No help from you, as usual." She fetched a pile of gardening books from the shelf, remnants from a brief, ill-fated attempt at rural domesticity, and began leafing through them. "Aconitum napellus," she read aloud. "Monkshood, also known as wolfsbane. Extremely toxic. Roots, leaves, everything. Even touching it can cause numbness. Useful if one wants to murder discreetly." She shut the book with a snap. So our killer knows plants. Could be a gardener. Could be Mrs. Stokes herself before she was attacked. Or, she paused, struck by a new thought, the caretaker's widow, Nora Phelps. The telephone rang. She snatched it up. "Agatha Raisin." "It's Bill. You've been at the hospital, haven't you?" "Obviously. How else would I find out what your lot missed?" "Agatha, please stay out of it. You're treading on police ground." "Then clear the ground properly. Cynthia said something about the garden. She was pointing us to the motive. She was half-conscious. She might have been delirious. So am I most of the time, and I still make sense. Listen, Bill." "No, you listen," he interrupted. "If you keep meddling, I'll have to caution you. This isn't a village raffle scandal." "You wouldn't dare." "I would. And for heaven's sake, stop pestering witnesses." He hung up. Agatha stared at the receiver, then said to Hodge, "When men can't keep up, they resort to orders. Typical." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. By late afternoon, the drizzle had thickened to steady rain. Agatha sat at her desk, tapping ash into the tray and scribbling notes. Aconite, Cynthia's garden, committee sale, Danforth's cover-up, Pottle dead, Phelps connection? The phone rang again. She groaned. "If that's Roy trying to book me on breakfast television, I'll kill him myself." But it was Charles. "Aggie, I've been trying you all day. Are you alone?" "Hodge is here, but he's sworn to secrecy." "Then listen carefully. I've just spoken to a friend in the Mircester planning office. The late caretaker's widow, Nora Phelps, was due to meet Danforth the week he died. She wanted compensation for land taken from the old garden." "Compensation, eh? That sounds more like extortion." "Possibly, but here's the twist. She's gone missing. No one's seen her since last night." Agatha sat up. "Missing?" "House locked, car still there, curtains drawn. Police haven't noticed yet. Then we'll notice for them." "Aggie, for once in your life, don't go charging in. This woman may be dangerous." "So am I," she said briskly. "Where's her cottage?" "Evesham Road, just past the mill. But promise me you'll wait till daylight." Agatha smiled into the phone. "Of course." Charles groaned. "You're lying, aren't you?" "Entirely." She hung up before he could argue. Outside, the rain eased. The evening light slanted pale and cold through the window. Agatha stood there, cigarette in hand, watching the puddles gleam like tarnished mirrors. She thought of the burned cottage, of Cynthia's bandaged face, of those words. It wasn't the ghost, it was the garden. The whole business reeked of guilt disguised as horticulture. She turned to Hodge, who was pawing at the curtains. "You know, old boy," she said, "I'm beginning to think murder grows best in well-tended soil." Hodge meowed, non-committal. "And here I am," she added, "a woman who can't keep a cactus alive." She laughed softly at her own absurdity, poured another gin, and felt that familiar thrill of danger settling in beside her, like a cat that wouldn't be shooed. Outside, the first stars blinked faintly through the thinning clouds. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, another woman had vanished, another secret ripened under the drizzle, waiting for Agatha Raisin to dig it up. "Tomorrow, Hodge," she murmured, drawing the curtains, "we start with the garden." The cat stretched, unimpressed by destiny. Agatha lit her final cigarette of the night, the smoke curling upward like a question mark she fully intended to answer. A mild drizzle blurred the morning, the sort of damp that sank into one's bones and mood alike. Agatha Raisin's little hatchback juddered along the Evesham back road as if protesting the mission ahead. Bill Wong sat beside her, politely resigned. "We could wait for a warrant," he said. "And we could also wait for world peace," said Agatha, lighting a cigarette. "But I prefer things that actually happen." "It's trespassing, Agatha." "It's research, Sergeant. Besides, if the police were faster, I'd stay home and knit." "You can't knit," Bill murmured. "Exactly." The greenhouse loomed ahead, half collapsed under ivy, its glass panes cracked like old china. A faded sign read Phelps Nursery, established 1972. "Charming," said Agatha, "if mildew and murder are your hobbies." They ducked through a side door, its hinges shrieking in complaint. The air was thick with the smell of damp soil and decay. Ranks of withered pots lined the benches, each filled with blackened stems. At the far end, a faint drip echoed from the broken roof. "Bill," Agatha whispered, "that's aconite." "You're sure?" "I've been reading gardening manuals since breakfast. It's practically my new religion." He crouched beside one pot. "Someone's tended this recently. See the fresh soil?" "So, our missing widow didn't vanish far. She was here." A flash of colour caught Agatha's eye, a handbag, half buried beneath a fallen shelf. She tugged it free, grimacing at the muck. "Nora Phelps, I presume." Bill carefully lifted out the contents: lipstick, checkbook, packet of tissues, and one loose cheque, dated 2 weeks before Danforth's death. "Made out to Nora Phelps, he read. "Signed by Danforth. £500. Agatha smirked. Our saintly baker paying hush money. How delicious. "Blackmail, you mean?" "Don't ruin the flavour." Bill slipped the cheque into an evidence bag. "So she was extorting him over something. Probably the fake bake-off wins you mentioned. You do realise you've been right so far?" "Of course I have. I always am. People just take a while to notice." At that moment, a cheerful voice broke the tension. "Aggie, there you are!" Agatha spun round, nearly impaling herself on a rusted trowel. "Roy, what in blazes are you doing here?" Roy Silver stood framed in the doorway, resplendent in a scarlet raincoat and holding a video camera. "I heard from Doris you were off solving crimes again. I thought, why not film the magic?" "Agatha Raisin, From Quiche to Justice. It's practically BBC Three material." "You are not turning my life into a daytime documentary." "But darling, imagine the ratings." Agatha hurled the nearest flower pot at him. It missed by inches, exploding against a bench. "Temper! Temper!" Roy squeaked, retreating behind Bill. Bill rubbed his temples. "I see this is going to be one of those days." Agatha ignored them both. She was staring at the benches, eyes narrowed. Something nagged at her. The arrangement of pots, the faint residue of white powder on the leaves. "Bill," she said slowly, "what if Danforth wasn't poisoned by the quiche itself?" "Go on." "Everyone's been focused on the pastry, but what if the aconite was added after the judging started? The garnish, remember? Gladys Trent plated everything for presentation." She handled Danforth's plate. "Exactly. And she's the only one with easy access to the kitchen between rounds. She could have slipped a few grains into his garnish while pretending to tidy up." "It's possible," Bill admitted, "but we'll need proof." "We'll find it," said Agatha, one way or another. Roy, peering through his camera, chirped, "Can you repeat that last bit for the trailer?" Agatha shot him a look that would have curdled milk. "Fine, fine," he muttered. "Honestly, such hostility. I'm only trying to make you famous." "I'm already infamous," she said. "I don't need subtitles." Outside, the drizzle had thickened into honest rain. The three of them trudged through the overgrown garden behind the greenhouse, boots sinking into mud. "There's another shed back here," Bill said. "Probably full of ghosts and compost," muttered Agatha. They reached the shed, a warped wooden structure sagging under ivy. Bill forced the door open and a swarm of damp air rolled out. Inside were old garden tools, sacks of soil, and a stack of papers bound by twine. Agatha untied one bundle and flipped through. Old receipts, letters. Wait, these are from the WI. Look, Danforth again. Donation to Bake-Off Fund. The man was everywhere. Bill frowned. He must have used the competitions to launder something, or at least to polish his ego. And Nora Phelps found out. No wonder she was cashing his checks. Assuming she's still alive to spend them. Agatha sighed. "You're determined to ruin my optimism." "I call it realism." "Boring word for cowardice," she said sweetly. Before Bill could retort, a rustle came from the far hedge. They turned. A figure darted from behind the greenhouse, a blur of raincoat and panic, then bolted toward the orchard. "Hey!" Bill shouted. Agatha, never one to let prudence interfere with drama, charged after them. The ground was slick, her heels ridiculous. She managed 3 heroic strides before her foot sank into a patch of compost, and she went sprawling, face first, into mud. Bill skidded to a halt beside her. "Are you all right?" She lifted her head, dripping with soil and indignation. "If you laugh, I'll kill you." A familiar chuckle answered from behind. Charles Fraith leaned against the fence, umbrella perfectly intact. "I see rural life suits you, Aggie. Earthy, in every sense." "Oh, shut up and help me up." He offered a gloved hand. She took it, slipped again, and nearly pulled him down with her. For a moment they both laughed, hers sharp, his lazy, as rain trickled down their faces. "You always know how to make an entrance," said Charles, "and you always know how to appear when least wanted." "You wound me," Bill called, "said you'd found something juicy, so I drove over." Agatha wiped her coat with a futile gesture. "You missed the chase. I was magnificent until gravity betrayed me." "Story of your life," he murmured. She shot him a glare but couldn't quite suppress a smile. They regrouped under the greenhouse awning while Bill radioed for backup. Roy, still filming from a safe distance, zoomed in on Agatha's mud-streaked face. "Perfect shot," he said. "Heroine in adversity. The public will adore you." "Roy, if you don't put that camera down, you'll be eating it." "You say that every time," he said fondly. Bill returned, wiping rain from his brow. "Units are on their way. Whoever that was, they knew this place well. Vanished through the orchard gate before I could see their face." "Probably Nora," said Agatha, "or someone using her as camouflage." "You think she's alive?" asked Charles. "Someone had to light that fire at her cottage. If she survived, she's scared. If she didn't, someone's cleaning up." Charles tilted his head. "You do enjoy danger, don't you?" "It's that or boredom," said Agatha, "and I know which I'm better at handling." An hour later, they decamped to the Red Lion, dripping on Doris Simpson's freshly mopped floor. "If you're bringing weather in, love, you might as well order something," Doris said cheerfully. "2 gins and 1 reality check," said Agatha. They sat by the fire, steam rising from their clothes. Roy fussed over his camera, Charles lounged with infuriating ease, and Bill attempted to restore order. "Let's summarize," Bill said. "We have 1 missing widow, 1 dead chairman, 1 suffocated chairwoman, and 1 baker's assistant who might be guilty of all or none." "Gladys Trent," said Agatha, "jealous, bitter, and too competitive for her own good." "She handled the plates," said Bill. "She had motive, resentment over losing prizes to Danforth's cheating." "And opportunity," Agatha added. "I saw her hovering near the judge's table. Everyone thought she was topping up the garnishes." Roy looked up. "So she slipped in the poison during presentation. Deliciously evil." "Stop saying delicious about murder," snapped Agatha. He shrugged. "Occupational hazard. I work in PR." The pub door opened, letting in a draught of wet air. Doris called, "Phone for you, Mrs. Raisin. Bill's office." Bill went to the bar, took the call and returned grim-faced. That was headquarters. Gladys Trent's confessed. Agatha blinked. "What? Just like that?" "She says Danforth insulted her baking, so she snapped. Claims she meant to make him ill, not kill him." Charles swirled his wine. Convenient timing. Too convenient. "Exactly," said Agatha. Guilt that quick is usually rehearsed. Bill frowned. "You think she's covering for someone?" "Or being forced to confess," said Agatha. "And if that's true, our killer's still out there, probably pruning roses and whistling." Roy sighed dramatically. "And here I was, hoping for a tidy ending before dinner." "Life isn't tidy, Roy," said Agatha, finishing her gin, "especially not in Carsley." She rose, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Bill, dig into Gladys's statement. Check who visited her before she confessed. Someone whispered the right words at the right moment." Bill nodded, pocketing his notebook. "All right, but for once, promise me you'll stay home tonight." Agatha gave him a sweet smile. "Of course," Charles groaned. "You never mean that." "No," she said, reaching for her umbrella, "but it makes men feel useful." By the time she returned home, night had settled thick and soft over Carsley. The lane glistened under the lamplight, puddles reflecting the golden glow of windows. Inside her cottage, Hodge sat on the hearthrug, tail wrapped neatly around him. "Don't look so smug," she told him. "I know I'm covered in half of Gloucestershire," he meowed reproachfully. Agatha poured herself another gin and stared out at the drizzle. Somewhere Gladys Trent was sitting in an interview room, confessing too neatly. Somewhere else, a widow was either hiding or being silenced for good. "Garden of secrets indeed," she muttered. "Every plant poisonous, every villager a weed." Hodge yawned, unimpressed by metaphor. Agatha smiled faintly. "You're right, old boy. I'll stick to quiches and corpses." She lit a cigarette, watching the smoke twist into the lamplight like a question mark. Somewhere in that curl of grey, she thought, the truth was waiting. Tomorrow she'd dig it out. She always did. The morning began with fog that smelled faintly of wood smoke and self-importance. Carsley's gossip network had achieved full voltage by breakfast. Everyone knew that Gladys Trent was in custody, and half the village had already decided on her guilt. Agatha Raisin, resplendent in her leopard print scarf and trench coat, marched up the steps of the Mircester police station like a woman attending her own trial, head high, cigarette lit, and moral outrage at the ready. Bill Wong met her at the door, expression halfway between fondness and exasperation. "You shouldn't be here, Agatha." "I shouldn't be doing half the things I do, Bill, yet civilization continues." "This is a police interrogation, not a WI meeting." "From what I've seen, your meetings could use a bit of WI efficiency," she shot back. Bill sighed, but led her inside. Gladys Trent sat at the interview table looking like a deflated meringue, pale, sticky, and likely to collapse under heat. Her hands trembled as she gripped a cup of tea. "Mrs. Trent," said Bill, patient but firm, "you've already admitted to tampering with the food." "It was just the garnish," she wailed. "A sprinkle of crushed aconite root, not enough to kill. I only wanted him sick, humiliated in front of everyone." Agatha folded her arms. "Well, you overshot." Gladys shot her a watery glare. "He deserved it. He stole my recipes, mocked my shop. I wanted revenge, not a funeral." Bill kept his voice calm. "You said someone told you to do it. Who?" "It was the ghost," she said miserably. Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Gladys's lip quivered. "I'm telling the truth. The voice on the telephone said he was the ghost of Mircester Hall. He knew things, my debts, my tax evasion. Said he'd tell the papers if I didn't do as he asked." "And you believed that?" "Wouldn't you, if he knew about your overdue VAT returns?" Agatha shot Bill a look. "Ghostly accounting now, marvellous. Perhaps he floats through the Inland Revenue." "Where did the calls come from?" asked Bill. "He never said." The line sounded echoey, hollow, like he was calling from a tunnel. Agatha leaned forward. "Or a cellar." An hour later, Agatha and Bill emerged from the station into a drizzle as fine as gossip. Roy Silver's bright blue Mini was parked at the curb, gleaming like an attention-seeking budgerigar. He leapt out the moment he saw them. "Aggie, darling, I've done it," he cried. "Your ghost has been unmasked." "What are you talking about?" "I borrowed a friend's contact at British Telecom. He traced the calls made to Gladys Trent's shop last month. Guess where from?" "Mars?" "Close. an old shed behind the grounds of Mircester Hall, leased years ago to a Mrs. Nora Phelps. Bill looked impressed despite himself. That's solid work, Roy. Roy preened. I know. I'd make a marvellous detective. Perhaps I'll launch a side business. Silver sleuths. Launch yourself into silence, said Agatha. We're going to that shed. Now, said Bill. It's nearly dusk. Crime doesn't clock out at 5, Bill. The path to the shed wound through the overgrown back of the Hall's estate, nettles clawing at their legs. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Creepy, muttered Roy, filming with a small camcorder. If I'm murdered, this footage will get millions of views. At least you'll finally trend, said Agatha. The shed stood crooked, its door half off the hinges. Inside was darkness thick with dust. Agatha switched on her torch. Papers littered the floor, and a folding chair sat before a battered desk. On it stood an old telephone and a bottle of brandy. Bill examined the receiver. Still connected. Someone's been using this line recently. Agatha's torch beam caught a second cup on the floor. 2 lipstick marks, 2 lives. She wasn't working alone, she murmured. Roy crouched beside the desk. Ooh, look at this. He lifted a small notebook, its cover scorched at the edges. Inside, the writing was cramped and angry. He'll pay for what he did to Henry. The Hall owes me everything. Henry Phelps, said Bill, the caretaker who died in the mower accident. Accident, my foot, said Agatha. Danforth's committee cut costs, left the equipment faulty. They hushed it up, gave her nothing but sympathy and weeds. She must have plotted revenge. Bill nodded slowly. She wanted compensation, blackmail Danforth, discredit the Hall, but she wasn't clever enough to act alone. Which means, said Agatha, we're looking for her partner in crime. They searched further, finding a second pile of notes, a ledger of gardening wages written in 2 hands. Agatha frowned. 1 neat, 1 scrappy, 2 authors again. Roy flipped a page. Here, recent entries. CS, overtime for groundskeeping. CS, Charles. Hardly, said Agatha. He's allergic to manual labour. Bill's eyes widened. Wait, the Hall hired a new groundskeeper last year. Colin Stokes, Nora Phelps's nephew. Nepotism with fertiliser, muttered Agatha. Perfect. So the pair staged this. She as mastermind, he as operative. Danforth's death might have been planned to disgrace the Hall and get leverage for a settlement. Until she got greedy or frightened, said Agatha. She turned on him, he panicked, and now she's gone to ground, or worse. Roy shivered. Literally to ground, if that aconite garden's anything to go by. Agatha gave him a sharp look. Roy, for once be useful. Ring the Hall from your car. Tell Charles we're here and we found something interesting. And no camera tricks. Roy saluted and disappeared. The light outside dimmed quickly, bleeding from grey to indigo. The shed's shadows deepened. Bill crouched near a pile of papers. Look at this. Phone bills, petrol receipts dated up to last week. He's been hiding out here since she vanished. Agatha's heart quickened. Then he's nearby. A sound echoed from outside, a faint scrape of metal on stone. Both froze. Bill? She whispered. He signalled for silence. Another sound followed, soft footsteps in the wet grass. Agatha lifted her torch and swung the beam toward the doorway. For a moment, she saw him, a lean figure in mud-streaked overalls, eyes wild under the torchlight. Colin Stokes. Police, shouted Bill. Stay where you are. The man bolted. Agatha lunged after him without thinking, nearly tripping over a rake. Stop, she bellowed. He darted toward the hall, cutting through the trees. Bill tore after him, radio crackling in his pocket. Agatha followed as fast as her heeled boots would allow, muttering curses unfit for broadcast. The path opened onto the hall's side lawn, slick with rain. Stokes sprinted toward the cellar doors and wrenched them open. Without hesitation, he disappeared inside. Of course, gasped Agatha, back to his haunting ground. Stay here, ordered Bill. Not a chance. They descended the stone steps into darkness. The air was thick, mould-scented. Bill's torch caught shelves of old wine bottles and gardening tools. From deeper within came the echo of movement. Stokes, Bill shouted. It's over. A voice answered, shaky, desperate. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Agatha stepped forward. Then why kill him? He laughed about Uncle Henry. Said accidents happen. So you made another accident, she said bitterly. He emerged into the beam, face pale, hands trembling, holding a garden spade like a weapon. "Drop it, Colin," said Bill calmly. "I didn't mean to kill him. Nora planned everything. She said we'd get justice, but then she got scared. Said she'd confess. I just wanted her to stop talking." Agatha's throat tightened. "So you silenced her too?" His eyes flickered with guilt. "I buried her, near the aconite beds. The plants hide everything." Bill moved slowly, hand on his cuffs. "You're done now, son. Put it down." Stokes's grip loosened. The spade clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like punctuation. He sank to his knees, muttering, "It was for Henry, only for him." Agatha exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. The cellar seemed to sigh with her, the ghosts of Mircester Hall finally settling. An hour later, rain turned to a fine mist. Police lights flashed across the hall's facade. Roy hovered near the gates, narrating to his camcorder in hushed drama. And so ends the haunting of Mircester Hall, bravely solved by the inimitable Agatha Raisin. Agatha snatched the camera from him. "End your haunting or I'll make you part of it." He huffed. "You're welcome, darling." Bill approached, mud on his shoes but relief on his face. They're taking him back in. He's repeated everything from his earlier statement, and he's confirmed Nora's burial place near the aconite beds, as you suspected. Agatha allowed herself a small smile. Naturally, though I'd prefer the universe acknowledge it more often. "There'll be paperwork," he said wryly. "Consider that acknowledgement." Charles's voice floated from behind. "You do pick the most romantic evenings for grave-digging, Aggie." She turned to find him leaning against his car, umbrella perfectly angled. Couldn't resist another chance to gloat. "On the contrary," he said, eyes amused. "I came to rescue you from yourself." "Bit late for that." "Always is," he said gently. For once she didn't have a retort. Later, back in her cottage, the silence felt almost luxurious. Hodge greeted her with the air of one mildly inconvenienced by human drama. Yes, I'm alive," she told him, "and muddy. Again." He meowed pointedly at the empty food bowl. She fed him, then poured herself a gin and collapsed into her armchair. The headlines would scream, "Quiche Killer Mystery Solved," by morning, and Carsley would dine out on it for months. But beneath the triumph, Agatha felt a flicker of melancholy. Danforth, Nora, Colin, all undone by pride and grievance. Ordinary sins, really. The kind people nurtured quietly until they bloomed into tragedy. She lit a cigarette, watching the smoke coil upward like a fading spectre. "You'd think I'd learn to stay out of trouble," she murmured. Hodge blinked, unimpressed. "Don't smirk," she told him. "You enjoy the excitement as much as I do." He stretched luxuriously before curling into sleep. Agatha smiled faintly. "Fine. One more case, perhaps. After all, it keeps me young, or at least distracted." Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. Carsley slept, content in its illusion of peace. And in her little cottage, Agatha Raisin, mud-streaked, triumphant, and just a little lonely, raised her glass to the quiet, knowing it wouldn't last. "Here's to ghosts," she said softly, "and to the living fools who chase them." The night after Colin Stokes's arrest, the rain came down like judgment, pelting the Cotswold stone of Mircester Hall until the gutters overflowed in angry torrents. Agatha Raisin gripped her umbrella against the gale, her trench coat flapping like a stubborn sail. Behind her, Charles Fraith cursed the state of his shoes. "Of all the ridiculous things you've dragged me into," he muttered, "this wins the soggiest prize." "Oh, stop whining," said Agatha, pushing open the cellar doors. "We're here to tidy up your family's reputation, not your footwear." "You make it sound as if I had anything to do with this murdering lunatic." "You have everything to do with him. He's your groundskeeper." Bill Wong's torch beam cut through the darkness below. "Stay behind me, both of you. The cellar's still a crime scene." "Then it's about to host its sequel," said Agatha grimly. They descended, the air thick with damp stone and the metallic scent of old wine. Somewhere deeper in the shadows, water dripped steadily, like a leaky conscience. Colin Stokes sat on an upturned crate, hands cuffed in front of him, guarded by a constable who looked as nervous as a rabbit at a dog show. The young man's face was pale and sharp, his eyes restless. "They said you wanted to talk," Bill said. Colin gave a humorless laugh. "Wanted? I'm done wanting anything. I just thought she might come." Agatha stepped forward. Well, congratulations. Here I am. What's left of your ghost story, Mr. Stokes? He sneered faintly. You'd love to mock, wouldn't you? The clever woman who always knows best. But you don't understand. None of you do. Try me, she said. Henry Phelps gave everything to this place, worked himself into the grave while Danforth pocketed the bonuses. When the mower killed him, they called it unfortunate. He was buried, and so was the truth. Agatha's tone softened slightly. So you decided to unbury it? A little poetic justice, he said, almost gently. A dose of fear for the men who made a widow of my aunt. By murdering 2 more people? His expression hardened. They weren't supposed to die. Danforth was meant to collapse, be humiliated, exposed as the cheat he was. Then Nora panicked, wanted to confess, said she couldn't sleep, so she had to be silenced. Agatha stared. You killed her? The storm rumbled above, shaking the ceiling dust. He looked down at his hands. I didn't mean to. I went to the cottage to stop her talking. She screamed, grabbed at me. There was petrol from the lamps. Next thing I knew, the place was fire. Charles made a sound of disgust. You absolute fool. Colin's head snapped up. You've no right to judge. Your kind kill with signatures and sealed letters, not flames. That's quite enough, said Bill sharply. But Colin wasn't done. He turned on Agatha. And you, digging and poking until everyone's secrets spill out. You enjoy it, don't you? Watching people squirm. Agatha met his gaze evenly. No, but I can't stand bullies who pretend to be martyrs. For a heartbeat, the cellar was silent except for the rain hammering above. Then Colin moved. It was sudden, violent. He lunged, shoulder first, knocking the constable aside and sending the torch skittering across the floor. Bill swore, reaching for his cuffs, but Colin had already grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy pan from a hanging rack. Agatha stumbled back, colliding with a stack of crates. Oh, marvellous, she muttered. Murder by cookware. Charles darted forward, but Colin swung wildly, the pan whistling past his ear. Agatha ducked, spotted a shelf of baking supplies from some long-ago fete, and without thinking, snatched up a rusty quiche tin. "Put it down," shouted Bill. "You first," she yelled back. Colin turned on her, eyes gleaming with fury. "You think you're clever?" Agatha hurled the tin with surprising force. It struck him squarely on the forehead with a resonant clang. For a surreal instant, he just stood there, expression stunned, then collapsed like a felled scarecrow. The cellar echoed with the sound of rain and heavy breathing. "Good aim," said Charles at last. "It's all those years of throwing away failed crusts," Agatha panted. "Excellent training for combat." Bill knelt to check Colin's pulse. "He's alive. Bruised pride more than brain injury." "Pity," Agatha muttered, straightening her coat. "I was rather enjoying the drama." By the time the ambulance arrived, the storm was easing. The constables bundled Colin into the back while flashes of lightning illuminated the hall's dripping facade. Agatha stood under the porch, arms folded, watching the scene with weary triumph. "Well," she said, "another charming Cotswold evening. We've had rain, madness, and a spot of violence. All we're missing is tea and scandal." Charles lit a cigarette, sheltering her with his umbrella. "You do realize you're part of the scandal." "At least I'm interesting." "Terrifying, more like." "You wouldn't have me any other way," she said, managing a grin. Bill joined them, shaking water from his sleeves. "He's confessed to everything. It'll make a grim trial. And Nora's body, he gave them the location, near the aconite beds as you suspected." Agatha exhaled. "So that's that then. The ghost of Mircester Hall laid to rest." "And the quiche vindicated," Charles added. "Yes," she said dryly. "My reputation rises like a badly timed souffle." They returned to Carsley the following morning beneath pale blue skies, the storm spent and the world annoyingly cheerful. The village green sparkled with puddles, each reflecting the neat cottages and nosy curtains of Carsley's finest. Agatha parked outside her cottage, exhausted but unwilling to show it. Mrs. Bloxby appeared at her gate, hands clasped in her cardigan pockets. "You look dreadful, dear." "Thank you. I've been risking life and limb for justice. Again." "I heard. It's all over the wireless already. They say you saved everyone with a quiche tin." Agatha groaned. "Next it'll be Agatha Raisin, kitchen crusader." Mrs. Bloxby smiled gently. "There are worse reputations to have." "Only just." They went inside. The vicar's wife filled the kettle while Agatha peeled off her coat and dropped into a chair. Hodge stretched across the table, inspecting her with the haughty detachment of royalty. "I suppose you think I'm mad," Agatha said. "No," said Mrs. Bloxby, "merely brave, and perhaps a little addicted to excitement." "Excitement is all that stands between me and knitting," Agatha said, "and I loathe knitting." "Still," said Mrs. Bloxby, pouring tea, "you've done some good. That poor man's death, Nora's grief, it's all found a kind of ending." "A messy one." "Most redemptions are," Mrs. Bloxby said softly, "but at least you baked your own pastry this time." Agatha laughed, startled into warmth. "Yes, though I can't promise it'll become a habit." "No one expects miracles." They shared a comfortable silence, broken only by the kettle's quiet hiss and Hodge's steady purring. That afternoon, Agatha ventured to the Red Lion. She needed the reassurance of noise and human absurdity. Doris Simpson was behind the bar, brimming with gossip. "Heard the news, Mrs. Raisin? You're famous. They say you knocked him out cold with your quiche tin. What a woman!" "Please don't encourage them," Agatha said, ordering a gin. "Too late for that. The Women's Institute wants to name a baking award after you. The Raisin Courage Cup." Agatha nearly choked. "If they do, I'll emigrate," Doris chuckled. "You'll love it, really. Carsley's proud of you." "Carsley's proud of anyone who survives its gossip mill." She took her drink to a corner table. Rain might have cleared, but scandal never did. Across the pub, two old farmers were already debating whether she'd planned the entire adventure for publicity. Agatha ignored the hem with professional skill. Charles entered moments later, sauntering over like a man visiting an exhibit. "They've been telling tales about you all over Mircester," he said. "Apparently you shouted, 'Die, villain,' before throwing the tin." "Utter nonsense. I said, 'Put it down.'" "Ah, much less theatrical." "I'm not in it for theatre," she said primly. He looked at her over his glass. "Of course you're not." She gave him a glare sharp enough to butter toast. "I'm serious, Charles. This time I'm taking a break from murder." "How long will that last?" "At least until tea." By evening she was home again, slippers on, cat fed, the day fading to soft twilight. The answering machine blinked red. She pressed play. Roy Silver's voice exploded through the speaker. "Aggie, you'll love this. I've pitched Agatha Raisin, the quiche avenger, to a producer friend. Think of it. Drama, glamour, pastries, peril." She froze. "He didn't," she whispered. Roy continued, undeterred. "They adore the concept. Can we chat tomorrow? I'm thinking leather jacket, theme tune, maybe a cat co-star." Agatha jabbed the stop button so hard it nearly cracked. "If he does that, I'll throttle him with his own scarf," she muttered. Hodge yawned, unimpressed by her threats. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "He deserves it." She poured herself a gin and stood by the window, watching the sunset gild the wet rooftops. Carsley looked peaceful again, too peaceful. She could already feel boredom prowling at the edges of her mood. No more mysteries, she told herself firmly. Hodge sneezed as if doubting it. Agatha smiled despite herself. "Fine. Maybe one more, but only if it involves food." She raised her glass to the window where her reflection looked tired, triumphant, and faintly ridiculous. "To survival," she said softly, "and to quiche tins, deadlier than they look." The cat purred in agreement. The village lights flickered on, the day's drama folded into memory, and Agatha, vain, brave, foolish Agatha, settled into the evening with her gin, her cigarette, and the quiet satisfaction of having saved the day, however untidily. Carsley, that most unflappable of English villages, recovered from murder the way others recovered from mild indigestion, by talking about it until the subject lost flavour. Within a week, the Bake Revival had been retired for re-evaluation. The Women's Institute issued statements of sympathy, and Doris Simpson was telling anyone who'd listen that she'd always suspected there was evil in puff pastry. Agatha Raisin, meanwhile, sat at her kitchen table, staring at a padded envelope from the WI as if it might explode. Hodge dozed nearby, tail flicking in lazy intervals. "Well," she muttered, tearing it open, "let's see what fresh humiliation they've cooked up." Inside lay a cream-coloured note in perfect cursive. "Dear Mrs. Raisin, please accept our apologies for the misunderstanding at the Bake Revival. In recognition of your perseverance and community spirit, we enclose a token of appreciation." The token was a small ribbon, pink satin, printed with the words, "Valiant Effort." Agatha snorted. "Valiant effort? I solve murders, for heaven's sake. They hand me a ribbon fit for a child's egg and spoon race." Still, she turned it over in her hands. The stitching was rather good. Hodge yawned hugely as though unimpressed by human absurdity. "Don't look at me like that," said Agatha. "A woman must take her triumphs where she finds them." 10 minutes later, the ribbon was discreetly framed and hung in her study, behind the door, visible only when she wanted it to be. The day stretched into its usual, mildly disappointing afternoon. Carsley's gossip returned to normal. Doris Simpson's nephew had been seen with a girl not quite suitable. The vicar's sermon on forgiveness was described as well-meant but uninspired. The rain came in fine threads that made everything smell faintly of wet hedgerow and tea. By dusk, Agatha was restless. Solitude never sat quietly with her. When the knock came at her door, she pretended annoyance, but felt secretly relieved. Charles Fraith stood there, trenchcoat damp from drizzle, holding a bottle of white wine. "I thought the village heroine might like to toast her survival," he said. "Heroine, my foot. Come in before you ruin the carpet." He followed her inside, his usual air of amused laziness in full effect. She fetched 2 glasses and poured. "You know," Charles said, settling into the armchair opposite, "you were quite remarkable this time. Tenacity, bravery, a rather alarming throwing arm. You're still talking, aren't you?" "Only because I'm impressed," he said, smiling. "You never do things by halves. You make the rest of us look decorative." Agatha blushed, which irritated her. "I'd rather be useful than decorative." "You're both," he said lightly. "Oh, shut up," she muttered, but her lips twitched. They drank in companionable silence for a while. Hodge stretched on the hearthrug, the picture of feline serenity. The clock ticked gently, the rain faded, and for once Agatha felt content, something she distrusted almost on principle. "Do you ever wonder," she said suddenly, "why I bother? I could have left this village years ago." "Because you love it," said Charles. "Rubbish. I love London. I love proper shops, decent coffee, people who don't ask what you're baking." "And yet here you are," he said, topping up her glass, "solving crimes for a community that doesn't quite deserve you." "They certainly don't," she said, taking another sip. "But I suppose someone has to keep them in line." Charles raised his glass. "To Carsley's defender, may her pastry never fail her." "And may yours always collapse," she said, clinking glasses. Later, after Charles had gone and the wine had dwindled to its last polite mouthful, Agatha sat by the hearth with the ribbon in her lap. Mrs. Bloxby's words came back to her from that afternoon at the vicarage. "Sometimes the ghosts we face are simply our past mistakes asking to be forgiven." Agatha grimaced. "Forgiven, maybe," she said aloud. "Forgotten, never." Hodge opened one eye, unimpressed by moral reflection. "You're right," she said. "I'm better at grudges than forgiveness anyway." The cat stretched, claiming his rightful space by the fire. Agatha lit a cigarette, watching the smoke rise in slow, curling ribbons that reminded her of unanswered questions. The next morning brought the inevitable return to life's smaller absurdities. The postman handed her the Mircester Gazette with a knowing grin. "Bit of light reading for you, Mrs. Raisin. Heard you're in it again." Agatha took the paper warily. On the front page was a headline, "Strange Happenings at Carsley Vicarage." She read the first paragraph, frowning. "Residents report unusual lights seen late at night in the vicarage garden. Sources suggest a haunting." "Oh, for pity's sake," she muttered. "Can't this village go a week without inventing ghosts?" Still, as she turned back toward her cottage, a familiar thrill stirred. The old itch of curiosity, sharper than pride and far more reliable than reason. Inside, Hodge was perched on the windowsill, tail flicking like a metronome. "Don't start," said Agatha, dropping the paper on the table. "I'm not getting involved, not this time." He meowed softly, an unmistakable sound of skepticism. "Fine," she said, pouring herself a coffee. "Maybe just a little look." As night fell again, the village clock chimed 10. The drizzle had returned, brushing against the windows in soft rhythm. Agatha sat in her armchair, slippers on, ribbon glinting faintly on the wall. "Valiant effort," she murmured. "Better than nothing." Hodge yawned, stretching luxuriously by the fire. Agatha smiled, reached for her cigarette case and struck a match. Smoke coiled upward, pale against the warm lamplight. Outside, the world was quiet but never still. Somewhere in Castley, secrets were already brewing, over teacups, under hedges, behind polite curtains, and Agatha Raisin, half amused, half resigned, felt that familiar spark of anticipation. "Here we go again," she said softly. The cat's tail flicked in agreement. The clock struck its last note. The smoke drifted higher. And in the heart of the Cotswolds, with gossip, gin and ghosts waiting in the wings, Agatha Raisin was once again irritated, intrigued, and entirely herself.